Greetings. My name is Jace Hargis, and I'm happy to share a bit of information about the affordances and constraints of integrating emerging technologies such as generative artificial intelligence into teaching and learning. I'm fortunate to be part of the New Zealand Food and Fibre Center for Vocational Excellence Emerging Technologies project steering group member, and I'm happy to share this information at this year's Research and Insight Forum. Very briefly, a background that I'll try to share with you over the next few minutes is I'll try to share a bit about the previous research that was done by the Food and Fibre group about a year ago. Some very brief background on AI and generative artificial intelligence, some of the international research that supports this, and then obviously some affordances of AI and some constraints and possible mitigations for AI, and just a little bit of possible next steps because we know how quickly this is moving, so that will be kind of fluid. So this is the previous paper. You probably can get access to this. It was about a year and a half ago. And I think one of the biggest drivers in this is to share these were ideas that were actively being pursued, some of them initially being pursued. I think now we've got a little more data on this, and I'll share some of that throughout this report that we can see some of these things coming through. So the first thing is this whole concept about how can AI be used in education. We're thinking about it with assessments, with formative and assessment as digital assistants, intelligent tutors. For the learner side, thinking about how we can help develop languages, group discussions, speech to text for learners with disabilities, advanced report writings, project management for teaching, help to create some inclusive lesson plans, create some adaptive feedback circles and cycles, increase the quality of curriculum, scaffolding that learning, and add more and more active engagement as well as authentic and alternative assessments. The benefits could be this adaptive design, allowing us to do more with less and kind of, turn when we need to. Students need more assistance and resources, idea generations, case scenarios for our classes, teaching strategies, kind of updating some of the active learning techniques that we have, and again, the real-time feedback on some automated assessments. The challenges obviously are going to be some over-reliance. I'll talk a bit about that later. Ethics, privacy, security issues, intellectual properties, copyrights, hallucinations, which have gone down but are still present, and then identifying actually which of these AIs will be best for whatever it is we're trying to do. A super brief background, of course, in no way is this all-encompassing, but just a reminder, the differences between AI and Gen AI. I think it's a nice graph here, but what is AI and what does it include? Machine learning, networks, and these generative models. But AI is just kind of this concept where it's going to analyze data to improve efficiency. I'm sure that you're all familiar with things like digital assistants, Siri and Alexa, as well as self-driving navigations and GPSs, as well as facial recognition. Gen AI is a subgroup of this that really allows you to create new text and images and videos and music and coding. These things have really kind of just exploded by simply detecting patterns from existing data. Obviously, the more data you have, the larger data models you have, the more that you're going to be able to be higher in prediction. So it's using these neural networks. I've done more and more research on how they're mimicking how the brain works with long-term and short-term memories, but it's actually using these to simply predict the next word. And I think you're hearing this a lot, is it's not thinking, it's not learning, it's literally a predictive pattern. One of the most famous ones, I guess, came out a couple of years ago, November of 2022, ChatGPT, which I like to spell out, generative pre-trained transformer. We also have Claude and Gemini, Perplexity, Pi, Grok. DeepSeek is a fairly recent one. If you're interested in kind of tracking some of these, Berkeley came out with the chatbot arena leaderboard. I've got a link here that you can kind of see which one's leading. I think as of February this week, Gemini is leading. And just to really kind of get down to the very specifics here, I want to be clear that the kind of work that I do and that I'm sharing is a very small portion of this. And we're still fairly at the beginning, even though artificial intelligence kind of came up with some ideas in the 1950s. And it's been kind of moved along in different ways. It's really been accelerated most recently because we've been able to do things so much more quickly just because of the technology of chips and so forth. But we are just talking about what's called narrow intelligence. And that literally is kind of a machine that allows you to, that will only do things that you tell it to do. And this is the arena of generative artificial intelligence. There is something where it is proposed that intelligence AI can start to think and do more than you tell it to do, which they call this kind of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. I'm sure you've heard lots of predictions about when that might happen: a week, a month, a year, a decade. And then there's, of course, the sci-fi stuff of super intelligence. Share a little bit of the research on this. This is my research. I think it's a nice little microcosm. The past year and a half, I've been able to do quite a bit of this, but starting with using ChatGPT and GitHub on some creative coding. So this is basically a colleague of mine and actually his students worked on this. And we were trying to figure out which ways we can use it and what were really the outcomes, how they were using it, both qualitative and quantitatively, and how we were comparing these to the outcomes of course, that had been taught similarly previously without using these. Secondly, about a year ago in April, I designed an entire course using AI. At that point, it was, again, a free model of GPT. And I did this because I was working with a lot of faculty trying to figure out what aspects could we do. I offer a 3-day course design studio where I use Wiggins and McTighe backward design. So I basically used it with this and had it create learning outcomes, had it create and align authentic assessments with analytical rubrics, and then align those appropriate teaching methods, active teaching methods, with that. It turned out surprisingly well. Obviously, kind of a caveat with all of this is lots and lots of checkpoints, lots of review for content experts, lots of work that I needed to do on the front end with the prompt engineering and then on the back end as well. So this is in no way a kind of a just put it in and it speeds out something perfect. Harvard has a lot of work going on. Harvard graduate school's got a lot of work with feedback, trying to create some of these, but they're really trying to work with more of the qualitative stuff as well. So having students reflect, we know this has always been really beneficial for increasing metacognition, and having them reflect and then summarize those reflections with prompts, kind of a dialogue. You think this, you believe this, you see this, and then it basically comes back with some other questions. I think some things you're seeing more and more is they're not giving you answers. Everyone thinks that AI is giving you answers. If you prompt it in a way, it can actually give you support and more questions and kind of inquiry-based learning. And one of the first papers that we did, seems like forever ago, was looking at how faculty and students were using AI in teaching and learning. And then we took all this data and we put it in and we basically analyzed this. So we did a qualitative analysis looking for clustering and pattern recognition, what kind of trends and codings that we could come up with that we typically may have used something like a Max QDA or NVivo, but we found out that it worked a lot better. Affordances, some of the positives, using these in your syllabus. Salem State has some work out there. You're seeing a lot more folks offering some guides, some verbiage that you can use, ethical use of it, sample Gen AI use in coursework. Like we always recommend, make sure that your students know exactly what's expected of them, whether it's the learning materials or it's how you're going to assess them, or it's the use of technology, or it's the use of AI. Right now, there is no right or wrong. There's just making sure that you're very clear and consistent on how you're using these tools. Lots of work on AI and assessment and real-time feedback. These used to be these chatbots, these agents, which were a bit archaic, and they use on usually some lower level multiple choices. You're seeing some more advanced work of that, and really some dialogue, which we know is really beneficial for students. I tend to be really interested in self-regulated learning, and some of my early work in my dissertation years ago was on this. And I think that they're really looking at how you can use some of these tools to enhance students' self-regulated learning. In this particular paper, they use the 6 Ps of plan, prompt, preview, produce, peer review, and this e-portfolio artifact. The last two are kind of interesting about looking at something called a Titan, which is actually a software program that uses both kind of long-term memory, so it remembers some things, and it attends to some of the short-term or the current things. This is something that historically it hasn't been able to do, but it will allow then students to reflect upon some of their past experiences and work, and then connect it to the current ones. And then the last one, kind of this explainable AI tool, thinking about how students, it's more than just the answers, but having them create an answer or work through a problem and then actually explain how they did that. So this explainable tool allows them to do that, coaches them to do that, and then therefore kind of helps them understand it in a deeper way. The next to the last section here, a bit of constraints and then some future work. Here are some constraints from Luckin out of the Brookings Institute, thinking about this in a couple different ways of overestimating AI's intelligence may be a problem, this cognitive atrophy, and that over-reliance. We used to do this with this Google making us dumber when we just ask Google questions all the time. And then I really like this illusion of effortless wisdom. I'm sure you've seen this if you taught any students, that typically they ask for the PowerPoint. Once they get that and they put it on their laptop, they think, well, I know it because I have the PowerPoint. And so this illusion that you can just get things by asking it, well, no, you actually have to go through the typical cycles of a bit confusion and frustration and kind of disequilibrium and kind of work with those. So how do we mitigate some of those? Well, empower education in this AI development. So bring them in the development and the regulation. Lots of flexibility and adaptability. So we're not just doing things in a linear way or one way, but lots of different ways so we can actually allow students to share with us their conceptual understanding. Position this AI as a teammate, not adversarial, but basically it's working with us in a way that is productive. And then obviously advance in these AI models. So they're just starting to come out in various ways, but think about how we can use these in education. A few more, again, we probably thought of some of these, but the ethics and bias. And so we want to try to use a very diverse data sets. We're talking about historically large language models. You're seeing more of these smaller language models that are real focused on the kind of questions that we want to ask. Keeping faculty always involved, at beginning, middle, and end. They've got to be involved in some of these, especially the assessments. New Zealand has just come out with this public service AI framework. You probably have access to that. If not, you definitely want to kind of get access because they really spell out a lot of these ethics and bias guidelines. Equity and access could be even more larger gap if we don't watch this. So providing equal access, allowing for the free version is one thing, but if you're going to actually have students use this intensely, you probably want to try to get some sort of an enterprise version for your institution so everyone has access to the most powerful platforms. Human interaction is got to be constant. You can't let this thing run on its own. So obviously thinking about it as a support and a resource than a complete replacement. Faculty can use this to draft, to think ideas. Everybody can, but really being involved in this ongoing access and usability. And obviously pedagogy kind of thing that I'm really working on is making sure that educators know what it is that we expect, certainly making sure that it's aligned, and really looking at these three major aspects of outcomes assessment and effective teaching methods. So what's next? Again, this is probably going to change tomorrow or the next day, but I really think that a lot more of the teaching and learning centers will be driving pedagogy, integrating educational technology, and kind of the scholarship of teaching and learning, teaching as research, hopefully with some blanket IRBs so they can get that data kind of, those questions asked, the data collected and shared in some capacity so that people can start to use each other's data and findings. Authentic assignments, I think that can leverage AI to create these portfolios. We've been talking about portfolios for quite a while. I think this will allow us to take it to the next level and really do a bit of a check and balance on creating artifacts that align with the outcomes. And then we use good, solid analytical rubrics that are, of course, are inter-rater reliable. More collaboration with industry as they're moving along. We want to make sure that we're tying our outcomes, our program outcomes with what their expectations are. Ethical use, obviously using it as a support, policing it may not always get us to where we want to be. And then obviously reevaluating the current tools that we're using with the institution above and beyond the learning management systems. Thank you very much. I hope that that's been useful. If I can do anything more, please let me know. And I will post all these links so that you can find them.